The day I won the lottery, my dad called to say my sister-in-law was pregnant. I quit my job in a hurry, gave her a big red envelope, and planned to go back to my hometown to take it easy. At the dinner table, I jokingly mentioned that I was unemployed. I never expected my sister-in-law's expression to instantly darken. "Ava, are you trying to freeload off your parents? I'm newly pregnant, and the doctor says I need to rest. Why don't you move out?" Seeing that I didn't respond, my sister-in-law sighed again. "If you insist on staying in this house, then you'll have to pay rent and living expenses on time. With so many people in the household, the expenses are high. We can't just rely on your brother for everything while you act like a parasite, can we?" I laughed. My sister-in-law probably didn't know that this old villa we're living in is under my name. Even her dowry came out of my pocket. So, who exactly is the parasite? After winning 50 million yuan in the lottery, I resigned immediately, claimed the prize in one go, bought a plane ticket, and returned to my hometown. I even gave my pregnant sister-in-law a big red envelope. Dad prepared a whole table of dishes and asked why I suddenly came home. I suddenly felt like playing a joke, so I intentionally said, "Dad, I got fired from the company. I might end up mooching off you from now on." Unexpectedly, my dad's expression changed. "Why would you quit a perfectly good job? It's so hard to find work these days. At your age, can't you be more sensible?" Looking at my dad's angry expression, it didn't seem like he was joking. Just then, my pregnant sister-in-law also spoke up. "Ava, you're not thinking of moving back home for good, are you?" I smiled and said, "What, sis-in-law, are you not welcoming me?" My brother and his wife had been married for 2 years and still haven't had a child. There were always people gossiping about them. I couldn't stand it anymore, so I took her to see a renowned gynecologist in the provincial capital. Unexpectedly, she got pregnant very quickly. Now, she can finally hold her head high and speak with confidence, and I am genuinely happy for her. But to my surprise, when my sister-in-law heard my question, her face instantly darkened. "Ava, you know I'm newly pregnant, and the doctor said the fetus needs quiet rest. Plus, with so many people in the house, it's not very convenient. Why don't you rent a place to stay?" As soon as these words were spoken, everyone at the dinner table fell silent. Dad's expression turned uneasy. Although I didn't interact much with my sister-in-law, I never forgot to include her in the gifts I sent home, so our relationship was always fairly decent. I set down my chopsticks and said softly, "Sis, what's inconvenient about it? I'm the baby's aunt, I can even help with childcare later. Besides, I just lost my job, how could I afford to rent a place now?" But my sister-in-law still wouldn't relent. "When the baby is born, we'll need to hire a maternity nurse, a nanny, and set up the baby's nursery. The house is already so small, where would they all stay?" I laughed. "Our house is a 3-story detached colonial villa with plenty of rooms. Even if we had a second or third child, there'd be enough space, you don't need to worry." I wasn't wrong. This old colonial villa was left to my mother by my grandmother and later passed down to me. With 3 floors above ground and 2 basements, the space is enormous. Currently, we're only using about a third of it. But my sister-in-law pouted her lips and actually started shedding tears, looking aggrieved. Lillian by her side quickly comforted her. "Sophia, don't worry, we won't let you and the child suffer any injustice. Please don't get upset, it's not good for the baby." My sister-in-law sobbed. "The doctor said women are most prone to depression during pregnancy. I just don't want a sudden stranger in the house, is that wrong?" As she spoke, she seemed to realize her words had been somewhat extreme. Her tone softened again. "Ava, I don't mean anything by it, but you've been working for so many years and still haven't gotten married. Now you want to stay with us for the long term, isn't that a bit inappropriate? Your mother passed away early, and it's always been your father paying for your education. Actually, it was all my son's money. Now you just quit your job out of nowhere and come home to sponge off your parents. Shouldn't you have some self-awareness? Don't be so shameless." My expression darkened as I glanced at my father and stepmother, Lillian. My father shot my sister-in-law a disapproving look. "You're going too far. This is not your house to rule over." Upon hearing this, my sister-in-law's eyes immediately welled up with tears. My brother quickly pulled her into his arms and said angrily, "Dad, Sophia is pregnant. Could you be a little nicer? Besides, what she said isn't wrong." My father completely lost his temper. He flung his chopsticks down and pointed at my brother, yelling, "Take your wife and get back to your room right now." My sister-in-law wasn't wrong, our mother passed away a long time ago. My father is a teacher, and my mother ran her own cosmetics company. During my high school years, my mom went on a business trip to another city and got into a car accident. She was in the operating room for resuscitation for a full day and night, but ultimately became a vegetable. At that time, my dad was busy at school, and I was preparing for the college entrance exams. I had to run back and forth between the hospital and school every day. Eventually, my body couldn't take it anymore, and I collapsed from exhaustion. My mom's passing plunged my dad into unbearable grief, but seeing me grow increasingly haggard, he also felt deeply distressed. One day, my dad took the initiative to talk to me, saying he wanted to hire a caregiver for Mom. Otherwise, if my college entrance exams were affected, he wouldn't be able to face Mom even in the afterlife. But I hesitated. Many caregivers are irresponsible, taking advantage of when the owners are away to mistreat patients. I really couldn't trust leaving my mom with a stranger. But my dad said he had an old classmate who studied nursing and was currently looking for a job. He could ask her to give it a try, someone familiar and trustworthy, which would put my mind at ease. Seeing how exhausted my dad looked, I eventually agreed. As expected, my dad's old classmate was indeed professional and very attentive in taking care of my mom. Every time I came home, I saw a clean and well-kept mother, which brought me a lot of relief. I took care of her for about 2 years until my mom passed away. After her death, I learned that she had left me the old Western-style house that her mother had given her. Friends advised me to sell the old house, but I didn't want to. That house held the memories of 3 generations. I wanted to keep it as a memento. As time dragged on, the old house began to deteriorate more rapidly. My dad said it was because no one was living in it. He suggested that we move there and help me take care of the old house. I agreed. Later, Dad got remarried and moved in directly with his new wife and her son into this old Western-style house. As for my stepmother, she was none other than Lillian, the caregiver who once looked after Mom. After Lillian married into our family, she was always very good to me. Whenever I had conflicts with her son Cody, she would take my side and scold Cody. But today, after this outburst from my sister-in-law, I suddenly realized something. Did my dad and Lillian never tell her that this house belongs to me? No wonder she's been acting so passive-aggressive after finding out I'd be staying here long-term. I quietly approached my dad and asked, "Does my sister-in-law know nothing about this old house?" My dad was about to say something, but Lillian stopped him with an ingratiating smile. "Your dad actually wanted to tell her, but I stopped him. Ava, if you want to blame anyone, blame me. I was the one who told Sophia this house belongs to Cody. You know how hard it was for your brother to finally find a girlfriend. The girl made it clear, no house, no relationship. Your dad and I are in a blended family. Back when we divorced, it was emotionally devastating, and on top of that, we had to pay for Cody's college. Where would we get the money for his house now? We had no choice but to resort to this." To be honest, I understand why Lillian said this. Children from blended families do have it tough. Some mothers even give up everything in divorce settlements just to keep custody of their kids, all because they don't want to miss out on their children's lives. After my father remarried, Lillian has been quite good to me. So, I spoke to her gently and persuasively. "Lillian, I understand your difficulties, but the truth can't be hidden forever. I still hope you and Dad will come clean with my sister-in-law sooner rather than later. If you're worried that my brother and sister-in-law won't have a place to stay, I happen to have bought a small apartment last year with a down payment. I originally intended it as an investment, but they can stay there for now. Hearing this, my father's eyes welled up with tears. Ava, all these years, I've always felt I've let you down. I never expected you to still care so much about your brother. Don't worry, I will handle this matter properly and make sure you aren't at a disadvantage. I nodded. Dad, even though you have a new family now, we'll always be family. This time when I went home, I originally planned to tell my dad about winning the lottery so the whole family could lie flat with me. But for some reason, everything that happened after returning home made me hesitate a little. Maybe I should wait and see before saying anything. For the next few days, every time my sister-in-law saw me, she either gave me the cold shoulder or made inexplicably sarcastic remarks. Some people are really thick-skinned, staying at someone else's house eating and drinking for free every day, and can't even be kicked out. They think they're charming, but in reality, everyone finds them annoying. Sentences like these were things I heard at home every day. If it were up to my temper, I'd have already fired back. But I remembered what my dad said about handling this matter properly, so I forcibly swallowed my anger. I trust my dad, and I trust Lillian. But I still underestimated my sister-in-law's determination to stir up trouble. That day, I got together with some long-unseen classmates and came home very late. Not wanting to wake my family, I didn't turn on the lights and quietly entered the bathroom with my newly bought toiletries. My bedroom is the master suite on the second floor, equipped with its own balcony and bathroom. However, the bathroom light was broken and hadn't been fixed yet. As soon as I opened the bathroom door, I saw, by the moonlight, a stark naked figure, followed immediately by a piercing scream. I quickly retreated and turned on the room light. Under the glow of the light, I saw my sister-in-law trembling as she walked out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel. I looked at her in shock. Sis, what were you doing in my bathroom? She glared at me. Can't you see for yourself? I was obviously showering. I was confused. Don't you have your own bathroom? Why did you come to mine? My sister-in-law snorted coldly. This is my own house. I'll wash wherever I want. Who are you to tell me what to do? Just then, Lillian arrived as well. She gave my sister-in-law a meaningful glance before forcing a smile to reassure me. Ava, I forgot to tell you, Sophia has moved into your room. It happened this afternoon while you were out. She complained her room didn't get enough sunlight, and the doctor said pregnant women need more sun exposure for the baby's healthy development. At this moment, I realized all my belongings in the bedroom were gone, replaced by unfamiliar furnishings. This bedroom does indeed have good lighting. Waking up bathed in sunlight every morning was what I considered the happiest thing. As an expectant mother, my sister-in-law deserves special care, but she occupied my room without my consent, which understandably made me upset. Seeing me frown in silence, Lillian sighed. Ava, we were wrong not to consult you about this matter beforehand, but considering your sister-in-law's current special condition, we had no choice but to act first and explain later. We hope you can understand. I understand that my sister-in-law might be emotionally sensitive due to her pregnancy, but did she really not have even a moment to inform me beforehand? Moreover, why did she choose to move in without any notice right after I had stayed for a few days? Doesn't this show a complete disregard for me as her sister-in-law? At that moment, my dad rushed over. Glaring at my sister-in-law with anger, he said, "What's the big deal about being pregnant? Does that give you the right to take over Ava's room? Change it back at once." Noting Lillian's awkward expression, I quickly waved my hand. No need, Dad. I'll just sleep in another room. After all, we have plenty of rooms. Or, I could sleep in Sophia's room too. My dad sighed. Ava, I'm sorry about this. I waved it off. We're family. No need to be so polite about it. Then, Lillian hesitated and said, Sophia's room is all filled with baby items for now, so it's not really livable at the moment. The corner of my mouth twitched involuntarily. Then which room can I go to? Lillian pointed to the nanny's room in the farthest corner of the second floor. I've already moved all your stuff there. The nanny's room was just slightly larger than a bathroom, with a pitifully small window, let alone any decent lighting. Sensing my dissatisfaction, my sister-in-law started her sarcastic remarks again. If you think this room has poor lighting, why don't you move to the attic instead? It's quiet, has great lighting, you'd definitely love it there. I was at a loss for words. Sis, if the attic is so great, why don't you move there yourself? Seeing the situation, Lillian quickly stepped in to mediate. Ava, it's so hot right now. How can we let your sister-in-law stay in the attic? There's not even an air conditioner up there. I smiled. Right, the attic is way too hot. Who would ask someone to live there? Realizing she had said the wrong thing, Lillian shut up and didn't speak again. And my father also glared at her fiercely before coming over to comfort me, saying it was only temporary for me to stay in the maid's room for a few days. Once again, I held back. After all, harmony at home is the basis for prosperity. But little did I know, what happened next completely shattered my worldview. That night, I had eaten too much fruit and couldn't hold it in until midnight, so I had to go to the bathroom. But since the maid's room didn't have a toilet, I had no choice but to use the shared bathroom in the house. As I passed by my father's bedroom, I suddenly heard Lillian's voice coming from inside. When are you finally going to kick that money loser out? Sophia said if Ava doesn't leave soon, she'll divorce Cody. My dad took a deep breath. Don't rush me, give me a little more time. Lillian grew frantic. How can I not rush? Sophia keeps threatening to abort the baby every day, I'm scared to death. And the poison you gave Ava, has it not worked? She's been taking it for days now, why isn't she dead yet? I was shocked. What kind of medicine? Lillian actually wanted to poison me? No wonder ever since I returned to my hometown, despite getting plenty of rest, my health had been getting worse and worse. Not only did I constantly feel dizzy and nauseous, but I also frequently had inexplicable nosebleeds. I thought it was just because I hadn't been back for so long and wasn't used to the climate. Turns out, my own family was behind it. Just then, my father lowered his voice and said, how could it not work? Have you forgotten how Grace died? Wasn't it from this very poison you used on her? Grace is my mother's name. After hearing my father's words, my body couldn't stop trembling. No wonder my mother passed away so suddenly. Could it actually be that she fell victim to Lillian's malicious plot? Moreover, my father was actually aware of it. Could it be that my mother was deliberately killed by my father and Lillian? I dared not think too much about it, the horror of this matter had already exceeded my comprehension. Through the crack of the door, I saw Lillian nervously seeking my father's opinion. Should I add more to it? Otherwise, dragging it out like this won't do any good. Honestly, we should just hire someone to run her over, exactly like we did with Grace, to save us all this trouble. My father nodded. That's the only way, but there's no need to rush. After all, this old Western-style house will belong to our son sooner or later. A little earlier or later doesn't matter. And we can't be too hasty about this. If a perfectly healthy person suddenly dies, it would easily raise suspicion. Listening to the conversation between my dad and Lillian, my mind went completely blank. Relatives always told me that with a stepfather comes a stepmother, but I've always considered myself lucky. My stepmother Lillian treats me well, so I've never resented her presence. Instead, I respect and care for her just as I would my own mother. Little did I expect that my mother's death was actually caused by her own hand. And my father, the man who had shared a bed with my mother for so many years, was actually involved in this murder. It's truly chilling. No wonder I always found it strange why my dad was so close to Cody, his son who wasn't even blood related. It turns out, he was actually my father's illegitimate child, and my mother was the one who ended up being completely taken advantage of. The empire she built through her own hard work ended up being handed over to someone else, and it even cost her her life. I need to find a way to avenge my mother. I stumbled back to my room in a daze. Early the next morning, I got out of bed with dark circles under my eyes. Only my sister-in-law and I were left at home. I'm going to get a health check at the hospital first, then I'll start my revenge plan. But unexpectedly, when I went downstairs, my sister-in-law smiled and called me over for breakfast. A bit puzzled, I asked, "Sis, if you have something to say, just say it directly." She smiled and said, "Ava, I know you're unemployed now, and it wouldn't be right to make you move out, but you know, with such a big family, expenses are high. We can't rely solely on your brother, can we? How about this? You can continue living at home, but pay 20,000 yuan a month for rent and living expenses. Consider it helping to ease the family's burden. What do you think? After all, you're just an outsider who's been freeloading in this house for so long. It's only right to charge you some money, don't you agree?" I have to say, my sister-in-law's calculations are truly impressive. I let out a cold laugh. Indeed, it's only right. But sis-in-law, perhaps you're unaware, this old Western-style house actually belongs to me. My sister-in-law was stunned and looked at me incredulously. "What nonsense are you talking about? How could this house possibly be yours?" I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not talking nonsense. This house is indeed mine. Doesn't it seem strange to you? How could my father, a teacher from a remote mountain village, afford an old mansion in such a prime location? Actually, this house was left to my mother by my grandmother. And all this time, it wasn't my brother supporting the family, it was me. So it's you who should be paying for living expenses and rent, not me." When my father first moved in with Lillian and her child into this old villa, he had repeatedly hinted to me that the house was in disrepair and needed costly renovations. After my mother passed away, she left most of her assets to me, including a significant insurance payout. Thinking we were family, I gradually transferred the money to my father for renovating the old villa. Back then, I was still a student and didn't need much money. I felt like among family, there shouldn't be any distinction between yours and mine. After I started working, I would regularly send money to my dad, hoping he could enjoy his retirement in peace. Later, I won 50 million in the lottery and originally planned to let everyone relax and enjoy life together. But I never expected that a small joke would reveal their true thoughts. And in the process, I finally learned the truth about my mom's death. But my sister-in-law still doesn't believe me. Clutching her stomach, she screamed hysterically, "Ava, you must be lying. At such a young age, you're already full of deceit, even claiming this house is yours. What a ridiculous dream." Just then, my dad and Lillian returned from their morning walk. The moment my sister-in-law saw Lillian, it was as if she had spotted a savior. Hugging her belly, she grabbed Lillian's arm exclaiming, "Mom, Ava said this house is hers." My dad's face suddenly darkened. Lillian hurriedly explained, "How could that be? This house belongs to Cody. Ava is just teasing you." As she spoke, Lillian secretly winked at me, signaling me to play along. I snorted coldly, directly took out the property deed, and threw it in front of my sister-in-law. To see whose house it really is, wouldn't checking the property deed make it clear? Sister-in-law's hands trembled as she picked up the property deed. The moment she opened it, her face turned pale. Then, swiftly shifting to anger, she flung the property deed in front of Lillian and yelled furiously, "Lillian, how dare you deceive me? No wonder you refused to add my name when we got married, insisting on waiting until after I had the baby. It was all a trick to lure me into your family." At this moment, my father lost his previous gentle demeanor and, suppressing his anger, interrogated me angrily. "Ava, didn't we agree that I would handle this matter? Why must you humiliate me like this and make things difficult for me? If I had remained in the dark, I would have chosen to swallow my grievances and obey my father's wishes. But now, all I want is to slap this disgusting man, a wife-murdering cheater, right in the face." I let out a cold laugh. "Dad, I think my sister-in-law is right. After all, I don't truly belong in this family. Since we're not family, many things should be settled clearly. My sister-in-law said I should pay 20,000 a month for rent and living expenses, but I'll give you a 50% discount. That's 40,000 a month for the four of you, which adds up to 480,000 a year. We won't count the time before your sister-in-law married into the family, just the past 2 years since she came, so that's a total of 960,000. For this 960,000, do you prefer WeChat or Alipay? Hearing me rattle off all these figures, my dad was completely furious. Ava, I'm your own father. How dare you ask me for rent and living expenses? I sneered, I'm still your own flesh and blood, hasn't sis-in-law been demanding money from me all the same? And according to the law, even if there's a blood relation, debts still have to be repaid. By the way, wasn't I also the one who paid for Cody's betrothal gifts and wedding banquet? He said he'd pay me back once they got married, but it's been 3 years now, can I finally get my money back? Hearing this, the already swaying sis-in-law, who seemed about to pass out, completely lost it, her eyes rolled back, and she fainted outright. Lillian frantically called an ambulance. After my sister-in-law was taken to the hospital, I quickly took the opportunity to clean up my original bedroom. It feels so good to move back into my own bedroom. But just as I started to relax, my dad knocked and walked in. Seeing that I had moved back, his expression quickly resumed its previous act of pretense. It's good that you're moving back. Actually, I had already talked to your sister-in-law about it before, and she agreed to give your room back to you. She just has too many things and wanted to wait until Cody was off work to move them. But I still want to say one more thing, you were too harsh with Sophia today. After all, we're family. What's the point of keeping such a tight account between family members? I chuckled softly, Dad, I'd love to treat Sophia as family too, but she's the one who refuses. What can I do? My dad sighed. Your sister-in-law is pregnant and a bit emotional right now. The baby in her belly is your future nephew. Just try not to take things personally. Also, after what happened today, Sophia has been very upset and even threatened to terminate the pregnancy. At this point, my father paused, then asked with a somewhat ingratiating tone. Didn't you mention before that you still have an extra apartment that could be transferred to your brother and sister-in-law? I was thinking, if we give her the apartment, maybe she'll calm down. No wonder my father's attitude suddenly did a complete 180, he was waiting to bring this up. I frowned somewhat hesitantly. Dad, I have no problem giving the apartment to my sister-in-law, but I just rented it out. Actually, I originally planned to confront Lillian and them head-on, but I was afraid they might pull some shady tricks behind my back. So I had to make a few compromises first. But don't worry, I can pay the penalty to the tenant and have them move out. Once they're out, I'll transfer the property to my brother and sister-in-law. Hearing this, my father finally breathed a sigh of relief. With a beaming smile, he asked me. Ava, Lillian just bought some oranges today. Would you like me to make you a glass of fresh orange juice? Hearing about food, I instantly became alert and quickly nodded, thanks, Dad. Orange juice is my favorite. Not long after, my dad came into my bedroom carrying a glass of freshly squeezed orange juice. From the looks of it, there didn't seem to be anything unusual. But recalling the conversation he had with Lillian that day, I couldn't help but shudder. I didn't touch a single sip of that orange juice. I took a small sample container from my cosmetics kit, filled it with some of the orange juice, and then brought the sample to a food testing facility. I wanted to ask them to test whether this orange juice contained any ingredients unsuitable for human consumption. The person who attended to me hesitated, explaining that the institution didn't allow private food composition testing. Hearing this, I nodded understandingly, then pulled out a stack of cash from my bag and slipped it into his hand. Sure enough, his expression relaxed, and he took the sample bottle of orange juice into the lab. The digits in my bank account were now my backup and confidence. Before long, the test results came out. Sure enough, that glass of orange juice contained excessive formaldehyde. Long-term consumption could cause nausea and vomiting in mild cases, and could lead to leukemia in severe cases. Fortunately, I've always been a picky eater and rarely had meals at home. Otherwise, I would have ended up like my mother, tragically killed by my father. I only blame myself for not seeing through my father's deep disguise back then, making me believe my mother died of natural causes. Even the car accident, I thought it was just an unfortunate mishap. But now it's clear that so-called accident was nothing but a carefully orchestrated plan. But Mom has been gone for so many years now, even if we wanted to investigate, there's no way to start. Unless we find a way to make the murderer confess willingly. But with only the orange juice as evidence, it's far from enough. I secretly bought a few more hidden cameras and installed them in discreet corners of the bedroom, living room, and kitchen. I refuse to believe I won't be able to capture the evidence I need. After agreeing to transfer the house to my brother and sister-in-law, my sister-in-law stopped causing trouble. But ever since she returned from the hospital, she's still been giving me the cold shoulder every day. What if the house is yours? It was just passed down to you from the previous generation, not bought with your own money. What's there to be proud of? I really wanted to tell her that the balance in my bank account could buy several of those. But after some thought, I held back. For the past few days, I've stayed at home, with my dad and Lillian going out of their way to be attentive, cooking delicious meals for me. To avoid arousing suspicion, I pretended to be unwell and had them bring the meals to my bedroom. I didn't eat those meals, packed them all up, and stored them in the refrigerator in my bedroom meant for cold drinks. That evening, as soon as I returned, Lillian greeted me with a beaming smile. "Ava, I've made your favorite, stinky tofu noodles tonight. The smell is quite strong, so you better come down and eat it fresh." She must have been anxious seeing me still full of energy. I agreed verbally but dashed into my bedroom in a flash. 10 minutes later, Lillian urged me again, saying the noodles would get soggy and taste bad if left too long. With no other choice, I went downstairs. But as soon as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw my sister-in-law seated at the dining table, devouring a bowl of noodles. Wasn't this the river snail rice noodles Lillian had prepared for me? If I wasn't mistaken, there must have been something extra added to them. Noticing my gaze fixed on her after I came downstairs, my sister-in-law swallowed the last bite of noodles and flashed a smug grin. "Isn't it just a bowl of rice noodles with snails? Why be so petty about it?" I sighed. "Sis, pregnant women aren't supposed to eat rice noodles with snails, are they?" My sister-in-law let out a burp. "Mind your own business, with your fake concern. It's sickening." Just as the word sickening left her mouth, my sister-in-law suddenly frowned and clutched her belly, groaning in pain. Lillian heard the noise and quickly came downstairs. "Sophia, what's wrong with you?" Sister-in-law was in too much pain to speak. I curled my lips slightly. "She ate all the snail noodles you made for me." Lillian's face turned pale. "What?" Then, trembling, she took out her phone and called an ambulance. At the hospital, despite the emergency treatment, the sister-in-law's child couldn't be saved. It was a fully formed male fetus. Lillian couldn't believe what she was hearing. Falling to her knees before the doctor, she begged him to save her grandchild. The doctor could only shake his head helplessly, explaining that the pregnant woman had ingested excessive levels of formaldehyde. Even if the baby survived, there was a high probability of severe birth defects. I went to help pay the bill, and when I came back, my sister-in-law had just woken up from anesthesia. The moment she saw me, she immediately became agitated and tried to lash out at me. "It's all your fault. You poisoned the luoxafen and killed my son. I'll make you pay with your life." Sister-in-law's face was twisted with rage, as if she wanted to tear me apart limb from limb. I felt a bit speechless. "Don't spew nonsense. Why would I want to poison you?" Sister-in-law had gone somewhat mad, crying and laughing hysterically. "You're jealous that I have a son, and you don't. I'm calling the police." Hearing her sister-in-law threaten to call the police, Lillian panicked and said, "Sophia, you shouldn't say such things rashly." My sister-in-law took out her phone, ready to call the police, but my dad snatched it from her and threw it to the ground. "Stop joking around." My sister-in-law looked at my father with disbelief. "Dad, Ava killed your own grandson, and you're still taking her side?" "Huh, what do you mean taking her side? He's just afraid his own misdeeds will come to light." Watching my sister-in-law's shattered phone, I took out my own and dialed the emergency number. "Sister-in-law, don't worry, I'll call the police for you." My sister-in-law was completely dumbfounded by my bold move, while Lillian and my dad on the side looked horrified and began to grow restless. This time, I owe thanks to my sister-in-law for her unintended assistance. Truly, when it comes to personal gains, even enemies can briefly become allies. From the moment I called the police until they arrived, my dad kept trying to persuade me to cancel the police report. I could only shake my head helplessly. It's not that I want to call the police, it's my sister-in-law who keeps saying I killed her son, yelling about calling the police. Hearing this, my father tried to persuade my sister-in-law again, hoping she would give up on calling the police. But my sister-in-law was already consumed by the pain of losing her son and wouldn't budge no matter what was said. Before long, the police arrived. The moment my sister-in-law saw them, she rushed over, pointing at me and crying, "Officer, someone poisoned my son to death." Upon hearing about poisoning and murder, the officer immediately widened his eyes. "What happened? Take your time and explain." My sister-in-law took a deep breath, then pointed at me with venom in her eyes. "It was her. She poisoned the snail noodles I ate and killed the son in my belly." The policeman looked at me, waiting for my explanation. I sighed helplessly. "Officer, I was the one who called the police, but I've been falsely accused." Yet my sister-in-law wouldn't back down, persistently accusing me, still making excuses. "It was you poisoned the snail noodles, and it killed my son." The policeman looked puzzled but patiently asked her, "You claim she poisoned and killed your son? Then who made the snail noodles, and who were they meant for?" My sister-in-law yelled, "It was my mother-in-law who made this for the murderer." But the moment she finished speaking, she instantly realized her mistake. The policeman sighed helplessly, "Your mother-in-law made luocefen for her, but you ended up eating it, and now you're accusing her of poisoning you? Doesn't that logic seem flawed to you?" Although I was temporarily cleared of suspicion, this was still a murder case, so the police needed to extract evidence from the leftover broth of the luocefen my sister-in-law had eaten. Just as they finished collecting the samples, I handed over all the surveillance footage, food test reports, and the food I had gathered over the past few days to the police. "Officers, I'd like to file a report." The next day, my dad and Lillian were called to the police station. My dad and Lillian were sentenced to 3 years in prison for poisoning and intentional murder, with solid evidence. My sister-in-law was still in the hospital, and my brother Cody was on a business trip, probably rushing back. Taking advantage of this gap, I packed up everything in the house that didn't belong to me and moved it all to my dad's old house. I even showed Cody's photo to the security guards and told them not to let him in. My older brother might not be good at studying or working, but he's certainly skilled at picking fights. If it weren't for me using our mother's inheritance to pay the exorbitant bride price for him, he'd probably still be single now. If he finds out that his wife had a miscarriage and his parents were thrown in jail, he'll definitely come after me for revenge. However, I still underestimated just how vicious my older brother could be. He was actually staking out at the entrance of the neighborhood and followed me into an underground parking lot of a mall. As soon as I parked and opened the car door, I saw a person wrapped tightly in layers rushing toward me, holding a fruit knife in his hand. Though his face was hidden, just by the way he walked, I recognized him, my half-brother Cody. Startled, I immediately dashed toward the elevator in the underground parking lot. But even with all my strength, he still managed to catch up with me. I frantically pressed the emergency button on the elevator. Just as the call connected, Cody swung his knife at me. I couldn't dodge in time and he slashed my shoulder. The pain knocked me unconscious. Before everything went black, I saw what looked like mall security rushing over. Terrified, Cody dropped the knife and fled in panic. When I woke up again, I was already lying in a hospital bed, with 2 police officers by my side. The officers told me that, according to the elevator surveillance footage, the person who attacked me was an adult male. However, because he was too heavily wrapped up, it was difficult to identify his face. I immediately spoke up and told the police about my suspicions. After comparing the fingerprints on the fruit knife, the killer was indeed confirmed to be Cody. 3 days later, the police arrested Cody in a shabby and dirty small motel in the neighboring city. With solid evidence against him, if I chose not to forgive, Cody would face a 2-year prison sentence. As soon as the verdict was announced, my sister-in-law Sophia came looking for me. It turned out that after her miscarriage and with both her in-laws jailed, she had no choice but to return to her parents' home. However, upon learning of her miscarriage and the sudden upheaval in her in-laws' family, her own family deemed her unlucky and drove her out as well. She had nowhere to go, so she came to beg me, pleading with me to spare Cody. After all, although Cody is a scumbag, he's still her husband now and the only person she can rely on. She knelt in front of me, apologizing, saying she had been deceived too, hoping I would let Cody go. Watching her cry hysterically, I sighed. Letting Cody off is fine. Over the years, he's taken quite a bit of money from me. You can pay back half for him. Once the money is returned, I'll let him go. Sister-in-law froze, stunned. Ava, you're asking for my life here. How could I possibly have the money to pay? I let out a cold laugh. If I remember correctly, Cody gave her a dowry of $500,000 alone back then, and now she's crying poor to me. Clearly, there wasn't much marital affection between these two to begin with. My dad, who's locked up, managed to send me a message upon learning his son Cody was also inside, saying he wanted to see me. I didn't really want to waste any more words on him, but considering I hadn't yet avenged my mom, I agreed to meet. Though it had only been a few months since we last saw each other, my dad looked like he had aged 10 years, his hair noticeably grayer. When he saw me, tears immediately streamed down his face. Ava, poisoning you back then, your stepmother Lillian and I wronged you. But Cody had no idea about any of it. If I'm gone, he'll be the only family you have left in this world. Please, just let him go, okay? If you're willing to let him go, I can leave all my property to you. I rolled my eyes. Did you call me here just to say this? How dare you plead for him? You had an affair behind my mom's back, got someone pregnant, and even brought the child home after she passed away. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Besides, do you think I need your money? I then showed him the balance in my bank account. My dad was stunned after seeing it. How do you have so much money? I gave a bitter smile. I won $50 million in the lottery. I originally planned to use that money to let us all live comfortably without working. Who knew you'd actually want me dead? Yes, poisoning had nothing to do with Cody. But what about this wound on my shoulder? When Cody attacked me, he didn't pause to consider that I'm his sister. I pulled down my collar, revealing a horrifying scar on my collarbone. The doctor said if it had been even 1 centimeter deeper, I could have died. Because of this scar, I can never wear the dresses I love again. My mom used to say that I was too emotional and would eventually pay the price for it. At the time, I thought she was exaggerating, but now I realize she was right. And wasn't she also a victim of her own deep emotions? When my dad saw that I wouldn't budge, he knelt down right in front of the glass partition. Ava, Cody is my only son, the only heir to our family. I beg you to let him go. If he ends up with a criminal record from this, his whole life will be ruined. He just lost his child, and now Lillian and I are in jail. He's been through enough. For the sake of all these years I've treated you well, please spare him, okay? I still didn't relent and was growing impatient. If there's nothing else you want to say, I'll leave now. With that, I hung up the phone and turned to go. Seeing I was serious about leaving, my dad panicked. He desperately banged on the glass and shouted after me. If you'll just let Cody go, I'll turn myself in for what happened to your mom back then. I paused in my tracks and turned to face him. Seeing that I hadn't left, he let out a sigh of relief, and then, with evident anguish, continued. You know about Lillian and me poisoning you, don't you? And you must also know about your mother's car accident and what happened afterward. I lifted my head, gazing at the man before me whose temples were streaked with white. Back then, my mother had overcome countless hardships to be with him, yet in the end, he was also the one who caused her death. As if finally making up his mind, my dad said. Just let Cody go, and I'll turn myself into the police to reveal the truth about your mother's car accident and death. It's been so long, and I'm sure you've wanted to avenge your mother all this time but haven't known where to start. If I don't turn myself in, no matter what you do, you'll never uncover the truth. I curled my lips slightly, the fish had taken the bait. How can I trust you? What if you go back on your word after I sign the letter of forgiveness? At this point, I have no choice but to be extra cautious. After all, my father and Lillian poisoned someone, but since it didn't cause substantial harm, they'll be released in a few years. But if he turns himself in over what happened to my mother, it's essentially handing over the rest of his life to prison, sacrificing himself to secure Cody's forgiveness. I don't believe someone as shrewd as him would truly be willing to do that. My father never expected me to suspect him, and for a moment, he seemed lost in thought. Ava, are you guarding against me now? You've changed. I snorted coldly, I haven't changed. The reason I didn't guard against you before was that I truly believed we were family. But now it seems you've just been using the pretense of family ties to hurt me. My father sighed. Fine. Back when your mother. All the evidence of what happened is stored in my notebook's cloud drive. The password is 88. Go look for it. 3 days later, with the support of the evidence, the court quickly convicted my father, Victor, and Lillian. Due to the severity of the case, my father was sentenced to life imprisonment. And I did not sign the letter of understanding. Over the phone, my father shouted at me hysterically. I've already handed you the evidence. Why are you going back on your word? I laughed, Dad, back then I only told you not to regret it, but I never said I wouldn't change my mind. Since childhood, my mother told me I was too emotionally invested and would suffer for it. Now, I've finally tasted the thrill of being free from emotional burdens. It truly feels great. After saying that, I left the prison and never set foot in there again. 3 years later, Cody was released from prison. Because of his time behind bars, he lost his job, and his wife divorced him. The first thing he did after getting out was to seek revenge on me again. This was exactly what I had anticipated. So, after struggling with the decision for a long time, I finally decided to sell that old colonial-style house. Before, I always thought that house was passed down from my grandmother to my mother and then to me, and keeping it was a way to hold on to memories. But after going through so much, I realized that keeping loved ones in your heart is enough. Those objects are just carriers, nothing more. After completely settling my family affairs, I used my lottery winnings to buy a house in a neighboring city with an incredibly good security system. But I never expected Cody would find his way in after all. He cornered me in the fire escape, holding a fruit knife in front of me, trying to extort money from me. Having spent so long in prison, he had long made up his mind, he didn't want to throw away his life just for revenge. But I didn't go along with his wishes. I grabbed the fruit knife from his hand and slashed it across my own arm. Then, while Cody was standing there dumbfounded, I snatched the knife and sliced it across his neck. Blood splattered everywhere. Cody frantically tried to cover his neck, but it was futile, his artery had already been severed. It wasn't until he stopped breathing that I shakily pulled out my phone and called the police. There were no surveillance cameras in the fire exit, and in the end, I was deemed to have acted in self-defense. I knew that if Cody hadn't died, I would have spent the rest of my life living in fear. Even if I gave him the money, he wouldn't let it go. He'd probably harass me for the rest of my life. The only way to resolve this was by hurting myself in the process. A month later, the wound on my arm had healed, leaving behind yet another terrifying scar. But I didn't find it ugly. To me, it was a medal of victory. When Cody was rushed to the hospital for emergency treatment, I uncovered another secret. It turned out that Cody and I were not related by blood. In other words, he wasn't my father's son. All these years, my murderer father had worked so hard and poured his heart and soul into the son he cherished. Only to find out he wasn't his biological child. How ironic. And as for me, after completely resolving all of this, I finally embraced a new beginning in life.